The Comair's carriers Kulula and British Airways are back in the skies again. Late last night, the SA Civil Aviation Authority gave the green light for Comair to resume after grounding them for 5 days after a number of incidents. I'm joined now by Luvuyo Silandela of the CAA. Luvuyo, thank you so much for joining us. So are both these airlines safe to fly?
Right. So the CAA has conducted an assessment and that culminated in some level 1 findings being raised, raising concerns about the safety status in the operations. We stepped in and implemented a suspension. Since that step, we've undertaken a process of verifying evidence that is presented by the operator to satisfy that they do have evidence to demonstrate that they have a proper and fully functional safety management system. Taking into account what has been presented and reviewed, the decision was taken then last night to basically make way for the continued operation of Comair.
All right. So obviously you were concerned after a number of incidents. These level 1 incidents are the most concerning. They require immediate action. I want to look at those incidents specifically and find out specifically how they were resolved. There was a flight, MN 451, I think, on the 7th of March. It was a Kulula flight, had to abandon its Lanseria-Cape Town route because of engine trouble. And apparently the same flight, now I'm not sure if it was the same aeroplane, you'll be able to clarify, but it's also a flight 451, had previous engine trouble earlier in February. Could you tell us, first of all, are those two issues on the same aircraft? Does 451 mean it's the same aircraft, or are they two separate aircraft?
Right. So there's essentially 3 serious occurrences. As you've alluded to, there were at least 2 engine failures. There was 1 landing gear issue where the aircraft operating had to divert for safe landing with passengers on board. So essentially what the regulator stepped in to look into is to assess the safety management system as well as the quality assurance by the operator in terms of looking at the risks that are in the system, how are they managed and resolved to ensure that there are appropriate mitigation measures. That is the focus, and that is where the findings relate to. So having taken the regulator through the process in terms of presenting evidence, these are the assessments that are conducted and these are the mitigating measures in place. With that assessed and giving us an assurance that there are these measures and the level 1 findings have been addressed, that paved the way for the continued operations.
I understand, but what I'm asking you for is some detail, because the reality is that there were terrified passengers on board on 2 flights, and I still don't know if it was the same plane, where engine failed and they had to turn back. That is a big incident. It required, a great deal of investigation. But what I want to know from you is it the same flight? 2 incidents on the same aircraft?
So there's 3 different flights.
No, I know. The one I'm talking about is the 451 on the 7th of March, which was a Kulula flight, and that was due to engine failure. And another flight, also called 451, apparently earlier in February, also engine problems. Was that the same aircraft?
Not at all. The ones you're referring to are 2 different aircraft wherein a similar issue was detected.
So is it a problem with the engines, and what is the problem? Why did that engine fail?
So that is essentially the crux of the exercise. The operator has a responsibility after encountering an incident of significance. It is incumbent upon the operator to undertake an investigation to determine what went wrong, what are the measures that should be in place to ensure that there is no recurrence. As you've mentioned, there was a similar engine failure. So this requires that there should be those steps that are taken.
Yes,
what is the role of the regulator then? Has been to ensure that there are sufficient systems in place to conduct an investigation, assess and have appropriate mitigation measures. That is essentially have been the evidence analysis that has been embarked upon during the preceding 5 days.
And my understanding is that the Civil Aviation Authority, the reason you had flagged this is you were concerned that they hadn't closed off this investigation properly. So now I would imagine you have all the paperwork you needed. But as a potential passenger, I think what we all want to know is there a problem with that engine? Has it been fixed? What was the problem? So are you not able to tell us?
All right. To just get to the issue of the engines, and by the way, the 2 affected aircraft are not currently in operation. There's a separate process to ensure that those aircraft are adequately ungrounded and returned to service. So they are not in issue at this stage. They have a separate process. What we are concerned with currently is the systems that I've alluded to that have since been demonstrated that they are functional, paving the way for the green light for continued operations.
I see, so I understand. So the 2 planes that had engine failure, they're actually not flying at all. That's still being cleared. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's a separate process for an aircraft that has been grounded.
I see.
It's regulated in terms of the legislation. You need to satisfy the regulator that the adverse airworthiness issues that have been identified have been successfully resolved,
and the plane,
paving the way for the upliftment of the grounding.
I hear you. The plane that had to abort its flight because it couldn't retract its landing gear, is that one of those 2 planes that's been grounded?
That would be a separate one, a third separate one. Also, there would be a similar process, taking into account the findings that have been made and the steps taken to ensure that it is satisfactorily addressed. So essentially, this means that a flight that is in service operated by Comair should be meeting the required standards of being airworthy and safe for operation.
All right, so those specific planes that had actual issues, they're not in operation at the moment. That goes to a very deep investigation. That's my understanding from what you're saying. One thing I wanted to get a comment from you on, NUMSA, when they were protesting earlier in the week, they said that some of their members, engineers in fact, were complaining that the turnaround time is not enough. In other words, from when people disembark to the new crowd of people get on to fly somewhere else, the turnaround time is just not long enough. And apparently, according to NUMSA, they had been flagging this problem in their record books. As the CAA, did you pick that up as a problem?
What I should indicate is that the oversight that is carried out by the regulator is comprehensive in that it is not limited to only one process. The one process that I'm alluding to was targeted at the mandatory reported occurrences of concern that allowed us to zone in, conduct a specific inspection that is limited to those issues and what may be within the scope of those issues. This is ongoing. The fact that Comair is returned to service does not mean that there will not be any oversight. It will be continuing, and there are various activities around the assessment of safety of operations.
All right. Do you get notified at CAA every time there's an engine failure?
So there's a variety of provisions that require notification in relation to incidents, and an engine failure in flight is one of those that are reportable.
Sorry to jump in, do you get immediately notified, or does it take some time?
All right, so it depends on the severity. They are all outlined in the provisions. For example, an accident where it is of a serious nature, within 24 hours, it has to be there has to be notification. So they are specific in terms of, in this scenario, this is the reporting requirement.
Mm-hmm. So why did it take so long for the Civil Aviation Authority to act? Because there were incidents right back in February, and you've only acted in March.
All right. So what I need to notify is that primarily the carrying out of operations is the function of an operator that has been approved, having undergone a process of satisfying the authorities that they do have the capability to run those operations. Similarly, when there is an issue that emanates, while there's a responsibility to report of first instance, it is the responsibility of the operator to take suitable measures to ensure that the identified issues are addressed. It is only upon evidence or where there's a cause for concern that there may be issues that warrant a specific oversight activity in relation to that failure.
All right, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening, Luvuyo Silandela of the Civil Aviation Authority. Still to come on SA Tonight.